Most bankers aren't ready to help you until after their third cup of coffee. But with Central National Bank's after-hours service, you don't have to wait for the bank lobby to open to get help. You can contact us from 6 to 8:30 in the morning or from 5 to 10 in the evening, and we'll connect you to a real, live, local person who can answer questions and fix problems 7 days a week. Bank different. Bank Central. Central National Bank. Member FDIC.
Before history is written, it's played. Before it's frozen in time, it's fought one shift at a time. Before it's etched in silver, it's carved in ice. What happens next will last forever. The Stanley Cup Final on ABC and ESPN Plus begins Saturday.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Trail Daddy, a Portland Trailblazers podcast from Blazers Edge, hopefully becoming one of your favorites. I am Dave Deckard, managing editor of Blazers Edge, and we're going to talk Trailblazers basketball as usual, but this week we're going to do something a little different. Something has happened since the last time that we podcast, and that is the loss of Trailblazers legend Bill Walton. And we want to take a moment to commemorate his absolutely unreplicated and unique position in the franchise. You can argue that there have been better players. You can argue that there have been other significant centers, but I don't believe that anyone has been able to duplicate what Walton did to establish the Trailblazers. So let's sit and think about that for just a minute. For those of you who lived through it, might be nostalgia. For those of you who didn't, might be a little bit of a history lesson. But either way, remembering the big redhead today seems appropriate. We're not going to go into excruciating detail or biographies of him. Those have already been written. We're really a week and a half or so past his death now. And so we're going to concentrate on what he brought that nobody else could. Now, Walton was drafted in 1974. He was already well known. He had played in UCLA, guided them to national titles, guided them to a fantastic winning record, had played in the footsteps of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who had preceded him, and actually had people talking about him in the same breath, which was nearly impossible to do because Abdul-Jabbar was the greatest center to ever play up to that time. Probably, I mean, Wilt Chamberlain, you can argue, but that's a little bit of NBA prehistory. Certainly in what was beginning to be the television era, Kareem was it and is still known as one of the founding grandfathers of the league as far as we know it. And the idea that Walton would even come close was somewhat astonishing, but he had developed his legend at UCLA. And when the Blazers drafted him first overall in 74, they expected to get a franchise-changing player. Now, that did not happen for a couple seasons because of injury. He played 86 games over his first 2 years, and there was some frustration over his durability. But all of that disappeared in his third season, 1976-77, when he played 65 games and led his team to their one and only NBA championship in history. And most of his uniqueness and significance in Portland revolves around that event. There are a couple things that he did that no one else has been able to duplicate in the same way. One is that he became the Trailblazers' first bona fide superstar. And we can argue. I mean, Clyde Drexler got famous. Damian Lillard certainly has been in more ads than Bill Walton ever dreamed of. But honestly, no one has ever captured the national zeitgeist, the national consciousness, the way Walton has from the Pacific Northwest. Bill was on Sports Illustrated. Bill was seen as an icon. When he helped the Blazers beat Julius Erving and the 76ers, for better or worse, and I think there are some maybe worse parts about this. I don't think it's insignificant, probably, that Walton and the Blazers were mostly Caucasian and that the Sixers were mostly African American, and it was too easy to talk about the star-studded team and their selfish play and their individual play. I'm not saying that that wasn't true, but I think part of why that narrative went down, that the Blazers were the good guys and the Sixers were the bad guys, a lot of it was because Portland was unknown and an underdog, but I think some of it back then, especially the reason it was swallowed whole cloth, may have had to do with, racial elements, so I want to tread lightly. That said, Walton, for whatever reason, was able to emerge out of the isolation of Oregon and hit, Sports Illustrated and other national publications. He was the one that people spoke of, national commentators. I mean, to the same degree as Kareem for a little bit, for the same degree as Dr. J. In that period, he was downright famous and was one of the faces of the NBA. He won Finals MVP, obviously. He also won NBA MVP. And if you had named 2 or 3 NBA players, he would have been among them. And that is absolutely astonishing, considering the position Portland was in and the publicity that they got in those days. If you think it's bad now, at least with social media and electronic media, you can break out pretty easily if you're really good or really charismatic. Now, we saw that with Damian Lillard. It was near impossible back then. And yet Bill took the league by storm. And it was interesting because it was not standard. This was not the guy that you would have expected to have been that kind of attention-grabbing superstar. In fact, if anything, he might have been the opposite. First of all, his play on the court was manifestly unselfish. I mean, he took 14 shots per game in the championship year, and his career high was the next year, 15.2. And he was a good shooter. I mean, he was shooting above 50%. And this was not just inside, but a little bit from the high post. He had face up, turnaround, that kind of stuff. He was shooting really well. He was Portland's best offensive player. And he just did not take shots to the level that you would expect an all-star or an MVP to do. In fact, in 1977-78, Walton averaged 5 assists per game, which is encroaching. It's not quite point guard numbers, but it ain't bad, especially for a center. He had 4 assists per game during their championship year. And Bill would catch the ball in the middle, and it was not like he was going to put on 52 moves and then score. That wasn't a part of Jack Ramsey's system to begin with, and it wasn't how Bill saw the game. Instead, he would look for the mismatch. He would want movement around him, and he would want to get rid of the ball very quickly. Now, if he had the shot, he would take it. But just as often, he was about drawing the defense and making the quick pass to someone else for a wide open shot that they would then convert, or drive for a layup that they would get out of the half court, which was just incredible. And by the way, Maurice Lucas's offensive rebounds, a lot of them came in part because of the attention paid to Walton. Look, Lucas was a fantastic player, but Lucas became a huge all-star player because he was playing next to Walton, because Bill would catch in that high post, and Lucas was over on the wing, on the, left side, usually about 20 feet out, where no power forward should be, and the opposing power forward would drift in to get the rebound or to help on defense, and Walton would hit Lucas, and Lucas would hit a jumper. Or, failing that, Walton would spin or pass the ball, and either way a shot would come up, and then Lucas would use his athleticism and quickness to get in and get the offensive board before his defensive man could. And there you go. And it proved a near unstoppable attack, but it did so because Bill refused to hold the ball, because he moved very quickly, because he moved the ball very quickly, and because he always hit teammates in the hands with excellent passes. His teammates in general loved playing with him, by all accounts, simply because it was such a joy to be able to see the floor, see the opening, get there, and get the ball. And only, I would say, Arvydas Sabonis has ever come close from the center position for the Blazers, and Arvydas played in a somewhat different era with a somewhat different team where true point guards had emerged a lot more, so he never got the chance to demonstrate everything that he could do. But Bill did, at least for a year or two, and it was phenomenal. And that has actually set the pattern for Portland culture. It's not like the Blazers don't love a scorer, but, the Blazers still revere unselfishness, still revere that team game. If you look in your Trailblazers fan heart, if you're of a certain age especially, part of you is probably a little suspicious of big-time scorers who, take over the ball a lot. Now, Damian Lillard, again, broke that mold a little bit because this is the new era. But if you look at, the non-Drexler big-time scorers, or even a guy like Anthony Simons today, there's a pretty good chance that you're undervaluing them a little bit, that you're saying, that's good, the points are nice, but you got to play team basketball. You got to run. You got to get back. You got to rebound. You got to play defense. And players who don't in Portland kind of get a little bit of short shrift. And the Blazers fandom has always prided itself on being a little smarter, a little different, a little more basketball oriented, a little more team oriented. Look, only when Damian Lillard came have we had a generation of fans that really adhered to a single player as opposed to a team. It took that long, 40 years plus of the franchise, to find a singular superstar that really captured the attention of the fan base as that singular superstar, as opposed to, this is a great guy for the Blazers. Drexler was phenomenal, Clyde Drexler, but when he was traded, everybody was sad, but quickly moved on, and the Blazers didn't lose big swaths of cachet or whatever, even after Clyde left, because people were going, okay, who's next with this team? And there are a lot of other players on it. Walton himself, there was a fair bit of acrimony against Walton a couple seasons after the championship when he was traded. There was sadness, of course, but a lot of people actually turned on him because they were ready to support the team rather than to support their superstar. That actually was inherent in how Walton played. And the other thing that he brought to the table, which was really interesting, is his role as an iconoclast. Riding his bike to the championship parade, speaking up against all kinds of issues, or for all kinds of issues, vegetarianism and anti-war and pro-this and marijuana use and all this stuff. I spoke about some of this in the write-up I did after Bill died, that the first superstar for the Blazers was outspoken and quirky and almost weird, set the tone for the franchise. That whole keep Portland weird thing, that this is different, that you wouldn't be the Lakers if you could, in a sense, in your heart. Sure, you'd love the championships, and sure, you'd love the free agents, but nobody would like to be that slick team that LA is and their arrogance as a franchise and self-centeredness and stuff like that. Nobody wants to be the pedestrian team. That the Blazers are quirky, that Portland is different somehow, that there's a unique culture here as opposed to your Minnesotas and your Oklahoma Cities, which are small market teams, which are excelling, but really don't have the same atmosphere. Bill Walton helped set that presumption. Bill Walton, in a sense, not only gave Portland fans confidence, maybe arrogance in some sense, but also gave them the sense that they were different, that they were unique, that this wasn't just about a player that they were watching, that this was about a spirit that was sweeping across the city that they were participating in. They called that Blazer Mania at first, but it absolutely morphed into a bunch of other stuff, including embracing players that nobody else would, valuing the little guy, the unselfish guy, the player that nobody else noticed, absolutely keeping the firm belief that the Blazers were special and worth paying attention to and worth coming to, despite the small market and despite the relative unknown nature of the franchise. I've been in Minnesota, and I've talked to people from a bunch of other places, obviously. And I will tell you, there is something different. Portland fans are indignant that free agents don't want to come to Portland. Now, again, in the Damian Lillard era, this is switched a little bit because the emphasis is switched of the league. But especially up until that point, I mean, people in Minnesota were not saying, damn it, free agents should come to the Timberwolves. It's a great team and, we deserve it. And it really sucks that they're not. They were lamenting it, but not in that same almost entitled way, that passionate conviction that there's literally something different about this franchise. That fandom exists everywhere and blindness toward your franchise. But that kind of utter conviction that you are special, that you are unique in ways that go beyond your own fandom, that's very Portland. And that's in part due to the surprise and the iconoclasm of Bill Walton, that he absolutely convinced an entire community that that was true, that he was special, that the team was special, and that they were special. That, as opposed to just the superstar is special. And that is absolutely phenomenal. I mean, contrast it with, say, Michael Jordan, who obviously was, the greatest player of all time or second, right? But when you think of Michael Jordan, even in Chicago, you think Michael Jordan is special. You don't think the Chicago Bulls are special. It's Jordan first and then the Bulls. It's Jordan first and then everything else. It was not so with Bill Walton in the nascent days of his career or even to today. It was the Portland Trailblazers are special, and Bill Walton is at the head of the Portland Trailblazers. You can draw almost a straight line between his approach and the ways fans in Portland begin to interpret basketball and their relationship with the franchise. The other thing, and the last thing, of course, that was absolutely incomparable was the championship itself. And obviously, you've seen the clips and you've heard Bill Schonely call it out. You've seen the pictures of the victory parade. We don't need to go into all that. But I think people to this day, especially if you weren't living through it, underestimate the critical importance that the NBA title had in Portland's legacy. That had the Blazers fallen short, had they lost to the Sixers, or had they not made it to the finals that year, this would not be the same story and this would not be the same franchise. That one event was like a volcano that changed the landscape around Portland every bit as much as Mount St. Helens erupting or anything else that you can name. It was the seismic event in the history of this franchise. And look, Drexler's team made the finals twice, and we remember them with longing and appreciation. Rasheed Wallace's team made the conference finals twice, and we remember them with some level of admiration. They were a good team. But see, that's not the same. That's not the same as saying neither one of those teams redefined the entire landscape of the franchise, as good as they were and as far as they got. That time, when the Blazers were 7 years into their existence, when relatively few people, by comparison, were actually paying attention to them. They had a fan base, but it was the fan base that you would expect an expansion team 7 years on who had performed mediocrely or worse as they were growing would have. There were basketball adherents. There were people who loved basketball and loved watching it and bought their season tickets and were rooting for them, and that was it. Walton and that championship captured the entire community. I mean, the ratings, there was something like it was 80%, 90% of local TVs were tuned to this when it happened, that everybody watched, that the victory parade contained more spectators than the entire city itself, that the topic of conversation for years afterwards, I mean, the year afterwards, the Blazers were on everybody's lips. And years afterwards, you could strike up a conversation about the Blazers and have complete strangers join into it. Into the 80s, even when they were not performing well, and you would say, well, you know, the Blazers aren't doing so well. And 3 people at the bus stop would chime in and start talking about what was wrong and how great it used to be and whatever it was. But everybody had that common experience. It was literally a where were you when? The same as the Kennedy assassination or the Challenger or whatever it would be, except instead of being a negative, a disaster that prompted that community consciousness, it was a celebration. And that's really rare in any community. I mean, it should show me another one nationally that has done that. I mean, the founding of the country, I guess, victory in World War II, maybe, you know, V-Day or something like that. But I mean, we're talking about once in many generations or centuries. Now, obviously, this wasn't a national thing, but for Portland, it was the equivalent. It was the moment that really the light switch came on for the fans and NBA basketball, for the fans and the Trailblazers. And that sense of innocence, many people coming brand new to the team and to the professional sport anyway, and the absolute unpredictable majesty and excitement of actually having succeeded, that Portland won. Now, I want you to think for a minute of everything that's happened since. And look, forgive me, it's going to sound harsher. I don't mean this in any kind of harsh way. I'm just describing it accurately. Most of Portland's narrative revolves around losing. Okay, drafted Bowie instead of Jordan, drafted Oden instead of Durant, almost got to an NBA championship with Drexler, had incredible teams with Rasheed and didn't make it. The Jailblazers era, Brandon Roy's knees, Damian Lillard's excellence, and then had to trade him away. Why didn't we get this? Why didn't this happen? We were so close. If health had been better, if timing had been better. These refrains for 45 years, we could talk about them. And every one of you understands those instinctively. I don't have to go much farther than a few words to get that response from your heart, because the Blazers have been steeped in the Blazers have been steeped in losing. The Blazers have been steeped in grabbing at the brass ring and falling off the merry-go-round, right? Walton won. The birth of the consciousness of Trailblazers fans happened via this championship and via the ultimate success. We came into this league, made our announcement, our debutante ball ended with us coming down the stairs and winning. And that, but for that, Okay. Again, I draw a parallel to Minnesota, who, by the way, is doing very well right now, and I'm happy for them. And congratulations, because maybe the Timberwolves will get a chance to do something that galvanizes them the way that Walton galvanized the Blazers and this title did. But, oh boy, that franchise for years has had the veneer of losing. I mean, fans shake their heads and analysts go, oh, and there's no reason to regard Minnesota up until this season, really, as anything other than a losing team. You got Kevin Garnett for a minute, and they did all right. They made it to the conference finals. That's what they've done again this year. If they don't keep it up, they're going to slip back. And you look at draft picks, and you look at coaching decisions, and you look at whatever, and Minnesota is just kind of droopy, okay? And there's no alternative. There's no counter narrative to that. The Trailblazers and everything you perceive about them would be the same way. We would be a very droopy fan base were it not for this event. Were it not for the 1977 championship that infused the culture with a brand of and an amount of winning that would not go away. That, again, for decades and decades, name me something from 40 years that was a cultural trend or whatever that still affects you. I mean, they're big if they exist. I mean, maybe you had Big Macs as a kid and you still do so now or something like that, but it's literally, all we have to say is McDonald's and everybody knows what's going on. It's that big. Only the huge ones. This still affects whether you understand it or not. Even if you're 5 years old, this event affects the bedrock of your fandom on which the passion is based. This is the reason that your dads and moms took you to games. This is the reason why people got excited. This is the reason why people still long for something and cheer for something and reach for something and believe it is possible, because the entire consciousness of the franchise was born in this victory. And having it born in victory is much different than having it evolve from defeat. And the Trailblazers to this day remain one of the most patronized franchises from their loyal fan base. And at this point, it's not because they're the only show in town, because you know what? Basketball isn't the only show in town. Anybody who wants to stay at home with their screen time can do it for the rest of their lives. There's no reason to follow anything anymore. You've got the universe at your fingertips. And yet, year after year, the Blazers are still talked about. They are still debated over. The Blazers' edge year after year is at the head of all team-based NBA sites. And it's not just because of our talent, and it's certainly not because the Trailblazers have the biggest fan base in the universe. It's not even close. But there's a reason why people who write about the Lakers go, damn, how the hell do you do that? And it's because of this fan base, and the fan base that was grown up and steeped in victory by Bill Walton. So, that championship, you cannot overestimate how critical it was, not just in gathering attention, but in keeping attention and in defining how the Portland fan base views basketball and views the Trailblazers. For all of that, we should thank Bill Walton. Love him or hate him, no matter what. And there was a lot of broadcasting, of course, that came afterwards that was funny and tragic and weird and all that stuff. He remained himself to the end. And more power to him. But you cannot deny that without him, the Trailblazers would not have a core. They would not have the same bedrock center that they do now. And we'd be trying to write and analyze and walk and run through quicksand, rather than on the solid base that we've been given. So, remember Bill Walton this week, and thank you, Bill, and to his family for everything that he gave. And we will be back in a couple of weeks with another podcast. We hope that your day is going well, and let's all look forward to the 2024 NBA Draft. Keep looking on Blazers Edge for analysis of the players and more analysis as we get to it. And we will see you again very soon. Bye.